Live. Excellent. We are going live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Just had a little bit of difficulties getting the Zoom call set up to be streaming to YouTube. As usual, welcome to another live stream on the Data on Kubernetes community. This live stream was actually number 83, but it was so good we had to wait a little bit to get it a week later, so that everything would be properly prepared. Very happy to be here today with Randy, who's going to be giving us a great overview. Well, actually taking it even a little bit further because we have talked about DataOps. So curious to see what direction Randy's going to take this. Before we get started, though, just in case you haven't seen already, we will be hosting a co-located event in KubeCon. The schedule will be coming out this week, where today we're confirming all the speakers. So very excited about that. Thanks to all the folks who sent in a CFP. As usual, you can check us out on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, you know the drill. That being said, very nice to have you with us today. Randy, I think your camera is not on yet, but I'm sure it will be. Now it is. What's up, man? Great to have you with us today, Randy. Randy and I have something in common. We both went to the same university, which is an amazing place. What university is that, Randy?
The only one that really matters in California, UC Santa Barbara.
Yes, very, very happy. This is the first time I've been able to share the space with a fellow gaucho. So very nice to have you here. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into Kubernetes, how you got into DataOps, and then a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, I started out surfing at Coal Oil Point, and
good plan.
That's a different vector. Basically, I'm really all about cloud native, and I have been building distributed systems for a while. I probably got my real start facing challenges with large chunks of data in music, oddly, and really to rewind back to UCSB, I was studying computer science and music, and we had VAX 11 750s and algorithms that would take note lists and turn them into audio, and these files were gigantic, and it was very, very hard to move things around, and so that was sort of my first chance to face big data sets where you couldn't just copy the data over here willy-nilly. You had to sort of leave it sitting where it was because it was a really big, expensive affair to do any kind of processing on it or to relocate it. And then that experience traveled into sort of the next generation of music technology, oddly, where we were recording stuff on hard drives. And so my technology, kind of focused there, led me into the digital audio workstation realm. And curiously, throughout that, I was kind of involved in finance loosely with some other people building algorithms, processing big sets of data, looking for inefficiencies in markets and things like that. And that led me into a large sort of transaction, basket transaction sort of platform with some friends that we built. And then we were dealing with huge amounts of data through market data. So kind of an interesting evolution, but always facing this problem of huge sets of data, hard to process. And in the beginning, having only one computer or two to work with. But then by the time, I got into the trading side of things, we had a distributed system on our hands, and we were handling feeds from different environments, and each of those feeds was a fire hose, and no one computer could handle them. So we had to distribute things, and the data sets ended up on multiple computers. But again, we wouldn't dream of kind of moving that data around or trying to process it remotely. We didn't have the networking equipment for that. And as we evolve, we got to the point where we say, okay, sort of at the next level, now what we can do is we can say, well, let's distribute this data, and let's distribute the processing to the places where the data, is located. And we'll have some big engine that will know how to bring all the data back together and give us insights in a single place. And so that was another step forward. And then finally, you get to Kubernetes and this, cloud native environment where so many of the problems that we had in trying to, deploy new versions of things quickly and to get things to scale, kind of go away because we've got this magic container technology. But the whole idea behind the container is at odds with the data because the container is ephemeral and stateless and you don't even know where it's going to run. And now you're back in that bucket where, your data is over here and your computation is over here. And so what I've seen as we move into this environment of using Kubernetes, it creates a whole bunch of new challenges for people who were in the previous generation of solutions where the data has a home and you move the computation to the data, and that's the way you get things to work efficiently. But there's I don't know if you're familiar with Gordon Gelder.
No,
Gordon Gilder.
Yeah.
Gordon Gilder. So I'm an old guy. Back in the 90s, there was this guy, Gordon Gilder, who was like talking about fiber optics and how it was going to change the world and everything. He's a futurist. And one of the things that he sort of suggested is that you waste the things that are cheap in technology and you treasure the things that are expensive. And so back then, we had 100 megabit Ethernet connections. We were like, yes, when you think about the size of data people are working with, you need to process the data where it is. You can't be moving the data around. Nowadays, we've got 100 gigabit, connections and more, and so all of a sudden we can start, thinking about things very, very differently. We can waste the network and treasure, the things that are valuable, which is our computation clusters and things like that. And so, just watching this evolution of, thinking and right now, I think we're really in a place somewhere between, stateless microservices run really great on Kubernetes and, big data platforms run really nice in environments where you run the computation where the data is. And we're not in either one of those places when it comes to DataOps. We're somewhere in the middle. And there's a lot of, I think that the cutting edge has really made a migration to provide complete solutions, all the way across the top where you can use this dynamic computation environment and still get the benefits of the massive computational, side from the data perspective. But a lot of firms, they have so much, kind of baggage to drag forward that the industry at large is still making this transition, and it's a big lift.
And with that in mind, because this is something we talk about frequently, what is the major problem that you see, stopper regarding running on data on Kubernetes? Is it a talent problem? It's a money problem? It's a technology problem? What do you think about that?
I think I think to some degree, there's definitely a knowledge gap insofar as people understanding how Kubernetes works and where it's different and what you need to do to make things effectively, operate against the challenges that you have in data processing types of environments. However, the other big issue, I think, is that people often try to they try to rationalize things in the Kubernetes world in a way that that fits maybe an older Mesos Hadoop kind of mindset. And I think that you have to rethink things pretty dramatically. And I think also people underperform because they don't recognize, they think that they have to sort of plan everything out, and they have to, do things that worked before, like ETL and stuff like that. And I think that if you really just go at it, you can move tons of data sets into a modern data lake kind of environment that can be accessed by a Kubernetes cluster in months, in less than a year, even at a very large organization, if you're willing to bite the bullet and go there. And so I think what happens is a lot of people get hobbled by trying to do things piecemeal, and you end up with lots of different little steps and these very disparate kinds of solutions that make it really hard to get to the finish line.
And that's precisely what we're talking today, is so that these solutions get out in the open, and aren't so isolated, like you said, piecemeal, or having to sort of, jerry rig something on your own, the, MacGyver engineering, whatever we want to call it. But it's that we are still, like you said, in that transitional period where we've got one thing on the other, on one side, and another on the other. But this is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you want to jump right into your presentation, it's probably a good spot to start.
Sure. Well, I think, one of the things that is pretty important about the way that we architecture or the way that we architect clusters on the Kubernetes front for DataOps is that the whole idea of Kubernetes is to make it easy for creative people to build solutions and to deploy them quickly and easily. And if your data solution is kind of all over the map, if your data sources have different sources and are split across different networks, you're gonna have a lot of challenge. And so one of the most important things is to bring all of that data together in one place, because a lot of times the real synergy comes from using these sets of data in creative ways across the many data sets that you've got. And so if things are locked up in different data stores, this thing's in that database, this thing's over here in this HDFS, and this thing's over here in another environment, you're going to have some big trouble. And so if you really want to unlock the latent power of that data, you've got to bring it all to one place, in my view, and you need to make it accessible to the people who are looking to explore new ideas and to experiment and to build solutions. And you've got to give them a platform to do that on. And so Kubernetes is clearly the go forward platform for the computational piece. And what Kubernetes gives us is a neutral, highly scalable environment for running these workloads. Then the next challenge is, and when you move to the cloud, here's another problem, is that while we have in Kubernetes a way to do things that's data aware, right? You can run, for example, solutions like HDFS in your Kubernetes cluster. And you can run data nodes, on each of the hosts, and then your Spark, components the tasks can be sent to the executors that are running on the nodes that have the data that you're looking for, just like it's always been. So Spark has the ability to integrate in this kind of traditional way. But in the cloud, if you're beginning to move to the more cloud environments, the scalability of the compute and the scalability of the storage are these independent beasts. And what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to have those actually operate as independent platforms. And that process then of pulling in the data sets from all of the different locations and dropping them into some backend object store, or typical data lake type of solution, S3, what have you, and then accessing that data in an efficient way from the Kubernetes side of things is really the key. And so there are tools out there like stream sets that automate the extraction of data from other systems and pull them into the back end in real time, so that you can operate all of your platforms as they've been operating, but continue to bring the data sets that you need to work on from an analytics standpoint into this, solidified single backend. And then, your Kubernetes component gives that liberty on the development side, the software supply chain convenience and all of the tooling that makes it easy to build these applications. Now, as soon as you accept that kind of distribution, you're back into, okay, now we're doing lots of network transfers, and you maybe take a 2x hit performance wise when you're running your computations. But at the end of the day, it's wasting the thing that's cheap, right? and focusing on the thing that's expensive. The talent and the analytics that you're building is the thing that you need to treasure. And we want to build a platform that takes away all of the obstacles from them being able to innovate and to explore and to experiment. So I think there's just a lot of value in looking to move as briskly as you can to a single, solidified data solution that's accessible to the innovation that happens on the Kubernetes side.
Mm-hmm. Very, very thorough answer. It's interesting that you're mentioning the sort of dichotomy between, as we've seen, like the big data stack, right? And comparing that and contrasting to computation side. Do you feel that part of maybe the lack of brisk movement towards this new paradigm is because of that there's still maybe a big data mindset where there needs to be a Kubernetes mindset?
Yeah, I think it really turns things on its ear quite a bit when because you're really like changing the mantra 100%. It was, hey, we've got to run the computation where the data is. And that greatly limits your flexibility from a computational standpoint. To now we say, okay, look, we've got a scalable solution for storage and we've got a scalable solution for computation. Mm-hmm. And we're going to bite the bullet and accept the fact that we're going to be streaming data like crazy, but this is what the systems are built for. Yeah. This is how the cloud works. It's a very different fundamental architecture. And have you run across Druid at all?
Yes, it has come up because of, as usual with all these things, there are debates. Is this solution or is it going to be that solution? So that has come up in a couple of conversations, but you can definitely take that a little bit further because some folks might not be so familiar with it. Yeah.
So this is a perfect example of a solution, and I'm not trying to promote Druid over anything else, but I just think that the architecture of Druid highlights some of these points, right? Imagine a situation where you need to do, some analytics processing, and the nature of that analytics processing is such that you do experience pain if you are constantly streaming the data. So what you could do is you could stand up a Druid cluster, and you could easily do this in Kubernetes, and your Druid data nodes you can ingest data into your Druid system, and the Druid system will save segments in, say, S3. And so the S3 system turns into this big backend persistence engine. But then from a computational standpoint, you're running all of your processing against these data nodes, and the data nodes have scalability, right? If you've got a few data nodes and that's good enough to do your processing, then great. But if you need more, then you can literally just spin them up. So you get this dynamic behavior. And this is something maybe I didn't hit hard enough early, is that when your data is sitting there static and it's controlling your computational flexibility, it delivers that static mantra onto your computational, scalability. And what Kubernetes is all about is elasticity from the computational side. And so when we want to be able to get that back, well, here's this happy medium, right? Yes, you can scale like crazy on your Kubernetes cluster and then have your backend be whatever it is, and that's going to be your bottleneck. Well, why not come up with a hybrid solution when it makes sense? And so as you scale out the Druid data nodes, let's say you've got 4 nodes and they have all the segments. Well, if you wanted to get to 6 so that you could increase your computational, capability by 50%, those guys can literally give up their segments and the other 2 guys can pick them up, but they're not copying them between each other. Everything's in S3. Mm-hmm. So the new guys just, pull the data out of S3, which doesn't, impact your current activities. And then when those guys have the segments that they need, you can start, processing there. And so you now have not only the elasticity, the hyper elasticity on your compute side, but you have semi-elasticity we could call it on the data side, where the actual data nodes can grow. They copy the segments indeed from S3, but they only do it once. And then, you've got this pool of machines that you can use to, perform all of your processing workloads. And then at the end of the day, if you want, after running this thing for a project that lasts 3 months, you could scale it away altogether. And yet you haven't lost any of your data, and you haven't really moved any of your data from a permanent home standpoint. And all of your systems that are, moving data into your lake, whether it's, S3 or Swift or, some other object store, are untouched by this activity, right? You've got sort of a tiered approach to solving problems. So that to me, seeing technology like that show up, that's truly cloud native, or that's one of the first things that I've run across, where it's not like, some people would call it Cassandra cloud native. Mm-hmm. You can store huge amounts of data in Cassandra. There's no master. You can replicate the data. You can lose a node and it doesn't matter. And you can distribute it across multiple data centers and do replication that way. It's a really cool solution, but it was created in an era before, the cloud technologies that we've got, where, object storage is the place you put huge amounts of stuff, and compute happens on nodes that have ephemeral storage that you can use for, transitory types of activities. And so I'm not saying that I don't like Cassandra, it's awesome. But it's really neat to see what can happen with more sophisticated architectures, like things, and things like Druid, which is, it's an analytics platform. It's not going to do what Cassandra does, but it's a new way of looking at things that really, leverages the cloud components and tries to create, some little piece of magic in the synergies between Kubernetes and the cloud infra, that you've got at these two different levels.
With that in mind, is when you're having these conversations, because maybe you can just give a little bit more background about what your company does, is you're very much in touch with end users. And so seeing sometimes, because having different conversations, sometimes end users are far more advanced than vendors will know or would like to admit, or different things like that. When you're having these conversations with companies, with end users, what are the responses? What are the reactions? What are their fears? What are their sort of obstacles into getting more into this data on Kubernetes mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's very insightful, because at the end of the day, when it comes to their data, the end users always know more than the vendors do, right? And so let me just explain RxM. So I'm a managing partner at RxM, and we basically are advisors and consultants, and we also are focused a lot on the training. So we were involved, for example, in the creation of the Certified Kubernetes Administrator, Application Developer, and Security Specialist exams. And we have, I think, one of the deepest, broadest sets of training for Kubernetes and generally things around that space. So a lot of firms will come to us if they're looking for some, cloud native training, microservices, container tech, Kubernetes and whatnot. And we're really just focused on Kubernetes. So yeah. Cloud native and the stuff around it. And so when we work with clients, we're often trying to enable them in many cases. So we're not like a vendor that, is going to do a long-term contract. Our goal when we work with customers is to get them up to speed and operating on their own as quickly as possible. So it's a little bit of a different model. And so we often will come up with a training program that will be tailored to the solution that we work out with them, and help their people get up to speed. So they need as little support as possible going forward, and they have as much agility in tackling new problems that they face down the road as possible. And so when we're thinking about the data problems, a lot of times grappling with the architecture and the nature of Kubernetes and how it operates, and thinking about the tooling that they're using, because many of these clients, they've invested so much in a lot of this tooling that you've got to find a bridge, from A to B.
They're not going to abandon that when, like you said, when so much work has gone in. No way. Yeah,
exactly. If Kubernetes can add value to what I have, great. Let's talk about that. But, there's I think there's this false idea that, everybody's just going to switch to Kubernetes and then they'll sort out their other stuff. It's quite the opposite, and
that's it. We talk about this time and time again. One thing is the what and how about running data on Kubernetes, but the other question, and once again, facing end users, is why. Why am I going to do this? Why am I going to internally have to fight battles about making changes? And so in your situation, what are the whys that you tend to use?
That's a good question. So, we have run so first of all, Kubernetes has sort of eaten the world, right? So that's a factor, right? A lot of the support, they almost archived Mesos, in the spring, right? Went to the attic. And so, if you want to be on the thing where innovation is happening, where new things are coming out and where great new projects are showing up and where people are spending all their time and money in the open source world, contributing value that you can harvest, that's something to think about. Another thing that's important is, for application software, packages are dead, right? That's the old way of thinking. Containers are the mechanism of distributing software. All of the ecosystem stuff, for distributing containers and housing containers and securing containers and the software supply chain and all that, that's all, baked into this container world. And so, clearly there, the rising tide lifts all boats. So there's an allure to being, open to and moving into this space so that you just have, the support and the benefit of all the latest technology. But the other piece,
don't wait too long to the point where your competitors are well integrated and adopted. I understand what you mean.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that's the fear side of it, right?
And that works. That works.
Yeah,
that works.
yeah. And then there's that. So then there's the other side of it, which is when you see. So I always like to think about it like this. If you look at object technology and you're thinking about things in the object technology world, having, gone through the inception of that and then all the way up to now where we're like, okay, we've thrown away all of the, the hyperbole and we've gotten down to what object technology really does well, which is allow us to, modularize large software. Well, we're not building large software so much anymore. We're building lots of small services. And so the idea of putting state inside a thing and then running it in a single address space, these ideas don't even fit anymore. And so I think when some of it is just rethinking architecture and understanding how modern applications need to be built to take advantage of the platform, because there's always this the platform moves ahead a little bit, and then the architecture of applications that are really going to take advantage of it, come up a little bit, and then you have this kind of an activity going on, and there's a lot of monolithic software out there and monolithic data processing, right? And so thinking about the next generation and having the ability to scale the individual components and the ability to have cross-functional teams operate independently and create new things fast. And this gets into DataOps, right? Liberating a team to have, how do you do DataOps? In the perfect world, you have all of your data available and in a way that's fairly easy to consume. And then you make it so that you can just provide the analytics logic quickly and easily, and then run that at scale to get your answers as quickly as possible. Well, that sounds a lot like having a big data lake in your Kubernetes cluster and deploying applications in containers. And so when you start looking at all of the, how do we bring the agile benefits to analytics teams? How do we bring, the short cycle times and the easy deployment and reliable deployment of software applications to analytics teams, there was a really funny one that somebody was going through. I was watching some YouTube thing. I can't remember exactly what it was, where, everything works until somebody decided my software needed to be upgraded, right? And everything blows up, right? And so, right, we're decoupling these analytics teams from all of that stuff, because they're in their own little containerized world and they're running their applications out there. And do you need to worry about security and things like that? Yeah, you do, but you can make that a cross-cutting concern, and you can handle it at a level that's independent. And so this is another one of the superpowers of Kubernetes. Let's say, for example, you want to really affect zero trust. Well, then you should encrypt everything on the wire, right? Holy mackerel. How are we going to do that? Well, just use a VXLAN overlay CNI plugin that encrypts everything in the tunnel, and you're done, right? Or install a service mesh and have MTLS set up for between the agents, right? So this is the kind of technology that you just can have, right? If you want it, and it addresses a lot of the laundry list of problems that are, cross-cutting concerns. And by having this platform that gives you this flexibility, but also is so, feature rich and is becoming really, really mature, the security is going to be up here instead of down here. And there's so much community focused on making it better and improving it, all the time, in all these vectors, from performance, observability, security, all those factors.
These are good points. And thinking about what you'd mentioned previously about training different organizations, obviously for folks that are familiar with, CKA, CKD, et cetera, there is that route. However, when we're talking about, and because it's a couple of things that you mentioned there too, is that when we're talking about this issue of, a DBRE or someone who, it could be an SRE, when we think about the different stakeholders, in a platform team that are going to be involved in these processes, what are the skill set, what skill set do they need to have? How can they acquire those things? And this is one of the things where we've talked about, could there possibly be in the future some kind of certification that would be more data relevant when talking about doing stuff on, running stateful workloads on Kubernetes, dealing with those challenges, because perhaps it's not fully covered enough in CKA or CKD. It is true that things, like etcd and CRD are going to be covered, but probably not as much as possible. In your, experience as someone who's a trainer, having to go about those challenges with an organization, a company, how would you approach that? And do you imagine that these things will be codified, let's say a year, 2 years from now?
These are really great questions, and not hypothetical for me. So we actually have clients who are like, look, we really want to understand this, and it's not covered in these other things, because to your point, the CKA, you're a cluster operator, right? And what does a cluster operator do? Well, historically, they operate a stateless ephemeral pod environment, and state is a second class citizen and thought of after the fact quite often. And when it is thought of, it's in many cases just, we're going to take the old enterprise stuff we had, get a CSI driver for it, and there, we're done, right? and so you're not making any of the, architectural or mental model changes that get you to, a DataOps kind of, operation. From that side of things, from the computational, data processing side of things, maybe for the lift and shift types of first efforts and stuff, that's a okay way to go. But yeah, we actually built an entire 3-day course on just state on Kubernetes.
Okay.
And I really think, like, when you look at Kubernetes 1.0, there was no, it was you run stateless services. You want a volume? How about hostdir, or something, and which was, that was a workaround, right? Okay, I've got HDFS, so just hostdir that, and okay, now it kind of works. The scheduling is all crazy, but at least it functions. And so then we got stateful sets, and so on, and now we're to the point where we've got features like volume populators, right? Where you can say, hey, I want to create a volume, but when you give it to me, make sure that what's in there is everything in this S3 bucket. Whoa, okay. So there's, and unfortunately, we're still early, right? The CSI, right? CSI went GA in 2019. And so we didn't even have really a stable storage interface for containers until a couple of years ago. And so there's, so many of these cool things, unfortunately, are alpha features or just beta in 122, or 121 or something like that. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot to understand. And the way that, I think one of the main value adds there is in working with the clients who are trying to figure out this, next generation of DataOps and how they're going to do it and how they're going to manage this, the storage side of the solution. They need to understand what facilities Kubernetes has today and where it's going. And that means, they have to go way beyond PVs, PVCs, and storage classes. They have to understand how, the CSI architecture works, and, and what kinds of scheduling, nuances are out there for like Spark, but also the built-in scheduler and some of these other, third-party custom schedulers, and things like that. And so that's, we sort of go in the weeds and spend all of our time talking just about, state volumes, the built-in volume types, and the different types of CSI solutions, object storage, block storage, file storage, and how all those things, can operate. And then, just looking at also just some of the performance differences between using a cabinet that you have on site, using something like an S3, and then actually using the SSDs on the boxes in your cluster.
Yeah, but I think it's, if with just unpacking a little bit of things you mentioned there, the fact that that there's been enough demand for a 3-day course about, working with state, I think that's a really healthy sign, particularly in our community, because sometimes we feel like, oh, this is just a crazy idea. But, once again, this is now, live stream number 83, well, actually 85, and we have 86 later today. But what I want to say is that, through having more and more conversations with different folks, it doesn't just seem that these are, isolated cases, but that there is something really strong to say about this. And then also that end users are seeing value. It's one thing if vendors saying, hey, I got a great idea. But what I always say is that if no one's willing to pay for this, what value is it really providing? And that's also where, too, is the business value that's behind that. I feel that's something that I'm looking forward to having more conversations about in our community. And because if you're sitting down with a customer and once again explain all these different things, all the different stakeholders are going to be involved, the technological issues, because also we see with Kubernetes, are we going to shoehorn existing or legacy technologies, or are we going to start with the more Kubernetes native ones? How deep do you want to get involved in the cloud native ecosystem? It would be interesting if you could talk about that as well. When you're interacting with customers, where the conversation is about business value. And I always ask about this, the people that you're having conversations with, is it only technical stakeholders, or is the CFO also getting involved? How does that go? And whether it's with data on Kubernetes technologies, that's one thing, but I'm also just curious about how you introduce them perhaps to the cloud native landscape and ecosystem. How do those things work in your case?
Right. So I'm a cloud native ambassador. Yeah. And so I drank the Kool-Aid. So you're going to get a specific viewpoint from me, but I'm also an Apache committer, and I'm on the PMC for Thrift. And
oh, wow. This is like an East Coast, West Coast rapper then. This is very
exactly right. Yeah. And so and it's kind of interesting. All the data stuff has traditionally, kind of been in the streaming. You got your, I just saw the recent Apache annual report, and Kafka is at the top of a lot of the lists for activity and things like that. Apache Thrift made the top 20 for the first time in a while for some things, which I thought was really cool. But anyway, you've got data streaming solutions, RocketMQ, Kafka, and so on. And then you've got, the Flinks and, stuff like that. And then you've got, of course, your traditional, Cassandras and Druids and things of that nature. And then on the cloud native side of things, you've got this real synergy and focus around Kubernetes, tons of stuff happening in observability, but also storage, right? And so we have the mechanical storage bits kind of going on in the cloud native side, in the CNCF at least umbrella. And then we have the projects that sit on top of all that storage stuff kind of happening in the Apache side of things. I think that's sort of curious. And it's here's another really interesting little anecdote. I looked at one time at the the programming languages on the Apache front, and it's somewhere in the 2/3 Java, and then 1/3 other stuff. And then I looked on the CNCF side, and of course, you know the answer there. It's kind of 2/3 Go, and and 1/3 other stuff. And so that's kind of an interesting, and I don't underplay that. You know, Go is a different way about thinking of things, and it is, you know, it's cloud native. Java is this amazing ecosystem of projects and frameworks and things that has developed over time. But at the end of the day, not cloud native. Historically, it was invented before cloud native existed, right? Yeah. And so, you know, nobody ever thought you'd be running 17 JVMs on the same computer, but we do that all day long in, you know, in a cloud native cluster. So there's just some interesting, you know, differences. And I think that there's convergence, you know, that can happen there. And there's live activity in that convergence. But to your question, I feel like there's definitely a need for you know, people to have a deeper experience around just data everything on Kubernetes. And I think there's room.
Good. And how can they get that experience? What's the first step that they should take if they want to get that? Because I think a lot of people look and they're like, this is overwhelming. This is way too much. It's going to take years. I'll hire somebody to deal with it, or I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Yeah, you kind of brought it up with the certifications, and you know, like the certified security specialist is something that requires the CKA first. And I could easily imagine a certified data engineer or something, right?
Specialization,
right, that would come after the CKA as well. And so now all of a sudden you've got some formalization, right? This is the curriculum. These are the things that we sort of expect people to know, and the community chimes in, right? And you also were kind of talking about like, where's value coming from? And I think one of the ways that you can see that is the activity. And when you look at the activity around storage in Kubernetes, the commits, the evolution of new features, and the focus in you know, like this podcast and all of the conferences have us at least one, pre-conference day, dedicated to this kind of stuff, and the number of sessions that are going on, and just the activity in out there. People are trying to solve these problems. These are active problems, and also it's just like a CI/CD pipeline, right? Have you ever seen two enterprises with the same software supply chain? No, right? I mean, they're always different. They all have their own different sauce or something, unless they just bought a solution from a vendor. They're doing something that works for them, that involves specific projects and ways that they interact together. Their pipeline for one piece of software might be different from that for another. And that flexibility is power, but you need to get over the complexity of getting it in place. And this is why, like, vendors who have a really deep understanding of the technologies and how to solve those problems quickly can often add a lot of value, because they can move you fast to a solution so that you now don't care about this stuff and you just use it, right? And you've built something that works for you, but you're going to, consume it. And it's the same thing on the data side, I think. And, if we took sort of the same sorts of steps we're taking with security and observability and things like that on the data front, I think we'll come out to a good place where we realize that it's absolutely critical. We realize that there's a dearth of understanding because it is fairly complicated, but necessary complexity is not evil. And then we tackle that by creating, a known set of knowledge that people should have as a base to work from. Build a certification around that, perhaps in the community on the cloud native side, and then us and other training vendors offering courses around this stuff, and having firms as they're moving this direction, looking at these things as resources to, I always feel like you can lead your business with training. Now, my company does a lot of training, so take that with a grain of salt, right? Or not. I'm an honest believer in it, because if you tell an engineer to do something, they're going to do it the way they know how to do it, and that's the way they've been doing it. if you as a CTO or a CFO or a CIO want to take your business in a new direction, you want to get cost efficiencies. If you're the CFO, you want to fully utilize your infrastructure. If you're a CIO, if you're a CTO, you want to innovate faster, or whatever your role is, and you show people the way. If you show an engineer a really cool bunch of technology and give them those tools, they'll use them. They'll know when to use them. And engineers make hundreds of decisions every day that they make independently of everything else. And it's based on their knowledge, their experience, the things they've been exposed to. And also they are risk averse, right? No engineer wants to be the person who releases the next big bug or problem or thing that has an architecture that keeps their company from being able to move forward. And so if you show them how to do this right, and you give them a chance to experiment with these things in a lab environment and that sort of thing, then they can go back and they look, I learned all this new stuff and I really get it now, and I can apply this actively to what I'm doing. And so that's my belief in the training side of it. And that also ties back to your leadership. We speak to people at every level, and a lot of times the bigger the project, the larger the number gets on any kind of activity that's going to happen internally and externally. You move up that chain pretty quick, right? Because as soon as you start talking, millions of dollars, everybody in the C-suite is aware of what's going on. They want to understand the justification. They want to, know that there's a robust solution that is, got a high probability of success, and that's going to give them the ROI that they're looking for. And you have to be able to speak to that.
And speak their language, because I think that's another additional challenge. Is obviously the numbers are there, like you said, when it's reaching those levels, those stakeholders are going to get involved in the conversation. But how can the conversation be driven in such a way that's in practical English, that's once again not overwhelming with too much jargon and terminology, but still making them feel like they're really being incorporated in the process? And it's not like, well, the CTO really knows what's going on here, the other ones will just get a short explanation, then we'll move forward. I think that's a challenge. And obviously that's a challenge that you're very much accustomed to having, because it's not just talking to the CTO. And we also ask these questions too. Is data on Kubernetes going to be a change that's going to be happening from top down? Will it be happening from bottom up? We see with other technologies, if it's, and we always talk about these developers. Who are these developers that are out there? They're only, I think I've heard there are between, like 27 and 40 million developers in the world. But when everybody talks about them, it seems like they know exactly who they are, and they're their neighbors and their friends and the people that live down the street. But I think in the same way with data on Kubernetes is thinking, who are going to be the drivers of change here? In your opinion, does it need to be, as a community, should we be trying to focus more efforts on C-suite level folks, or focusing more on DBA? We've talked about this many times, the transition from DBA to SRE, data engineers. Obviously, you want to kind of be able to touch on a little bit of everything. But in terms of seeing change happen, as someone who's very much on the ground and having direct contact with customers, where do you see those changes happening? And as a community, what lessons should we keep in mind in order to drive those things more? Because one of the things that we say frequently is we're trying to have conversations that will be shaping the next 10 years of data. So what can we do, Randy?
Yeah, that's a loaded one. Well, number one, I think that it might be a mistake to see all organizations as the same. I see some C-suite folks, and it kind of depends on the business too, and what their business focus is. Like if you have a technology company, then you can speak a lot more tech to even the CEO, because that's their business. And the chief executive should understand their business, right? They don't always, but they should. And so that's one thing. But then you get into other businesses where it's healthcare or finance or something, and they understand all that, and the technology is a little bit more opaque. So you sort of have to know who you're talking to. If you're communicating, business value in the finance C-suite, and you're communicating a little bit more bias towards the technology to a technology company, I think those are some things that you want to think about. And I also think that it has to be organic. I don't think that that is it just selling it at one level is always going to work. There are some leadership teams that will say we're doing this, and then they marshal some big effort and drive the company forward. But that's usually the result of some event, that took place, something pretty important in like a merger or new leadership or something. And so usually it's a lot more organic, it's a lot more evolutionary. And I think, that the work that, podcasts like this are doing, where you're communicating, the value proposition at lots of different levels, talking about the people on the ground, the thought leaders in the middle, reaches, and then all the way up to the top. You have to reach everybody, progressively and incrementally,
Completely agree. Because like you said, one thing is having a 3-day course about, working with stateful workloads and things of that nature. Another thing is if you got 3 minutes to tell a CEO who's about to take a flight, this is what, how do I condense this? And I think this is a work in progress. Like if I had that, playbook, I'd already be using it. But I think that's what we learn with conversation after conversation.
And it's molten too, right?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And because Kubernetes is such a vibrant, dynamic environment, staying up, on top of that, and also once again going back to the CNCF landscape, and I say this as well because Chris Anderson said it himself. He's like, I don't know about all the projects. Like, how could I possibly know about all of them? Like, there's no way.
Right.
Like, you can't. And so you do the best you can.
And if he doesn't know about all of them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great answer. Yeah.
Free press for all the ambassadors is like, thank God. But I think with that in mind, in your case, how do you stay up to date on all the different things that are going on? Particularly, once again, as someone who's customer facing, what are some habits or resources that you tend to use that help you stay up to date?
And I don't know if this is available to the rest of the world, but for us, our whole business is about trying to make sure that we are aware of as much as we can be so that we can bring that value to our clients. So we have the wonderful benefit of networking with a bunch of fantastic customers. And so all of our customers have their own challenges and experiences and thoughts about this stuff. And then we work with them as partners. And so we absorb a lot of, knowledge and experience that way. But we're also really, really big believers in the CNCF and its mission. The CNCF works super hard to try to solve problems for the end users and for the community. And, not be kingmakers, but also filter out the noise so that people can focus on things that could actually work. And then this evolution of standards, and there's a lot of white papers that, come out of these working groups and stuff like that. And so, we're involved in some of that. Like we've got, generally we have somebody on the release team for Kubernetes, just so that we're giving back, but also, finding out constantly what's coming up and what the latest stuff is and what kind of is in flight and things like that. And we have people that sit on all of the tags, as they're known nowadays. Yep. So, we're sort of basically flies on the wall most of the time, just absorbing the discussions, and we all share that. Yeah. So we use, Slack and other means to make sure that anytime we see some movement in a certain space, and it looks like there's something interesting, that information flows out to all of the consultants internally and instructors. And then every once in a while, we'll do some projects, and customers drive our focus a lot, right? A client may say, hey, we want a class on this. And we'll say, okay, well, that doesn't exist, but these are the things that we would need to research and put together to really do a good job on this. And then we go out and do it. And so some of it's, just documenting things that have never been documented, or putting things together in a way that they've never been put together, and experimenting on it. And, that's a lot of our daily, activity.
But I think it's a brilliant strategy. And also for a lot of companies that are out there and aren't sure how to start tackling this stuff. And maybe the idea for some people at management is like, I'm going to send my employees to volunteer in an open source project, not knowing really what the exact return is going to be. Yes, you should. It's a really good idea. Just yesterday when we had our live stream, which is about backup and restore, we were talking, and Salman's a very experienced speaker and also does a lot of training, things like that. And he was saying, we were talking about Kubernetes is, it's something that they say about sports, it's like 90% mental and 10% physical. Kubernetes, although there are very heavy technical challenges, I don't know if I want to, equate it to 90-10, But the people aspect of it and the community aspect of it, if you're not seeing that or having that as an integral part of your strategy, I think you're making a big mistake. Because like you said, that's where you come across the trends. That's where you see where the action is, the difficulties that are happening. And also in the case of the CNCF, doing a very good job of including end users. It's also seeing what they're talking about and realizing this is what's actually providing value. We could have a wonderful open source project with really cool people and things like that. But at the end of the day, if it's not adding value, and this is also why the CNCF is now adding even, a business value group as a SIG so that folks can get involved and just specifically address those questions. I think that gives you a much more holistic view rather than sitting kind of in a technical cave and thinking, oh, we've got this brilliant idea, but not really being close to the pulse about what's going on. So I think it's a very good strategy. Good. We're almost out of time. Randy, is there anything else that we need to know that we haven't heard yet? Perhaps any special things going on in your company? Anything on the horizon?
Well, the only thing I would say is that I hope that folks show up for KubeCon virtually or in person and stop by and say hi.
That's pretty easy, and I will definitely do that. Well, it's at least easy for me. I'll encourage other folks to do the same thing. Just before we finish, though, we have a tradition where while we were speaking, we have we have a wonderful graphic recorder who's been creating a visual depiction of the stuff that we were talking about. So let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Very, very good. And we even got a little bit of UCSB in there. I had to inform Alcon right now. I was like, you've got to get something about UCSB in there. So he did. But anyway, like I said, this is, live stream number 83 or 85 or whatever we're going to call it. We've had a lot of conversations. This is, in terms of fireside chats, really solid. Definitely want to have you back. Really liked your insights and put a lot of these things in perspective to understand as much as we want these things to be happening, right now. Rome wasn't built in a day. What are the actions that we can be taking to make these conversations easier, to make customers more relaxed, to make practitioners more relaxed too? Because if a lot of people just come into it with a understandably stateless mentality for everything, then these are the things that we're trying to show where the value can be added by running stateful workloads on Kubernetes. Once again, going back to those whys, why am I going to be doing this? And also anticipating the questions from a customer of the business value and perhaps the internal battles that will have to be fought, whatever kind of training might be necessary to get staff up to speed. These are all very, very good questions. So Randy, I thank you very much. It's no surprise that someone from my alma mater gave such a wonderful talk. I'm not surprised at all there. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, and we'll be seeing you at KubeCon.
It's been my pleasure and look forward to it.
Take care. Have a good